Good morning, everybody. This is Maria Lupita, New Mexico medium or Southwest psychic. Today, I want to talk about how I began to discover the abilities and gifts that I have after my near-death experience. So super quick for the purposes of the video, in the year 2000, I had a near-death experience on the day that my daughter was born. Not because of her birth, but because of a planned surgery that I had after her birth. I was given an epidural for her birth, and the catheter was remained in my back so that they could prep me for the surgery later that day. I was supposed to be completely awake and alert through the entire procedure and was never given general anesthesia. And instead, they gave me what's called a spinal block through a catheter that was inserted in my back. And because of that, I was given either too much or too fast, and it actually stopped my lungs from breathing and my heart from beating, and I had to be resuscitated. It's estimated that I was out for approximately 5 to 8 minutes. During those 5 to 8 minutes was an entire lifetime on the other side. That was an attempt to prepare me for my return and how to cope with the things that had happened prior to my near-death experience, and how to apply and how to acclimate back was one of the most challenging things I've ever experienced in my life. Upon my return, I had a really difficult time because, one, I didn't want to be back. I had to accept the choice that I made to return. People thought that I was having postpartum depression, but it was really a feeling of missing home. I wanted to return, and I was frustrated and upset with myself for having returned. Things just did not feel right. The reason that I had my near-death experience is because I was going through one of the most difficult challenges in my life that I was uncertain I was going to face. So not only did I have to face all of that, I also had to deal with and cope with my life and my senses being entirely different than they were before. Everything was entirely heightened for me, amplified and made deeper. Now you have to understand that at the time, my world was not great. I was living a really challenging situation, and that was made worse. And on top of that, everything that I was feeling was amplified tenfold. And so I really had to learn how to manage emotion, manage my mind, manage my thoughts, really focus, and how to just feel better. Never in my wildest dreams did I ever think that I would become what I am today, which is a medium, a spirit healer, a spirit reader, a mystic, a wisdom keeper. The sessions that I have are so different. It's not just, oh, let's see what's happening in your life and let's see if we can get stuff right. Or let's see what loved one comes through and wow, that was really cool. That's not the kind of work that I do. The kind of work that I do is so deep, soul level work that can completely, entirely change a person's life. It has been one of the most challenging things for me, and only through my understanding. So when I first started, my intent was just to feel better, just to cope with my own world, just to cope with being back. It was never with the intention of doing this for other people. It only happened as a result of my going through my own healing. So when I came back, going through the most challenging things, feeling raw and everything open, I wanted nothing more than to go back. And everything that I had been feeling felt like a curse. And this curse kept getting worse. My emotions were amplified. Everything was deepened, heightened, and again, it was excruciating and painful. So I had to start somewhere, anywhere. And that started with a prayer that was basically that, okay, God, if you cannot take this from me, then help me understand it. Help me just to feel better through it. And so it began with that prayer. I guess I felt like it would be so much easier. Maybe there's an assumption that once we have this near-death experience, that everything is okay once we return because we've had this profound knowing and awareness. It's the exact opposite. It is like having something completely shown to you and then being completely thrown back into your living hell. and trying to sort it out, and then also trying to figure out what all these new sensations are. So I was on maternity leave for about 3 months, luckily, after my daughter was born, but then I work full time. So I went right straight back into work, and then feeling all of these energies and emotions and frequencies was really, really difficult for me when I first returned, especially when I went back to work, because I could pick up on things that were so subtle that were obvious to me, but weren't obvious to everybody else. And so I had to understand that that was different as well. I had a sense of that prior to my near-death experience, but it was made 10 times worse. Every single one of us has an ability to sense and feel our environment, to tune into what is happening, to have these gut instincts, but that is oftentimes removed from us just in the course of living. When you watch children, you will see that they are so naturally attuned until they unlearn it. And it happens by society, it happens by their upbringing, and it happens through experiences. But we are all born with it, with the intention to come back to it. So what is it? To come back to the understanding that every single one of us is not only a biological and neurological miracle that can completely function and analyze and think and assess and feel and emote, but we are also massively spiritual beings with another part of us that is what I call our God spark. That is our soul, our consciousness that is born with us, that wants nothing more than us to fuse with it so that it can make life better. And so that was what the process was for me upon my return. I didn't understand it at first, and it has taken me almost 21 years to finally come to this point. In the very beginning, it was raw, open, uncensored, unfiltered, and just open. It was blaring, it was loud, intrusive, obtrusive, just overwhelming to me and my senses and everything that was my being. It was like short-circuited. So when I went back to work, I of course worked with people that I knew, their acquaintances. You become familiar with them. And so as I began to engage with them, I began to sense and feel like layers of information that just seemed deeper and richer. And I didn't really fully realize it at first, that it had to be brought to my attention. So as I was having conversations with coworkers, they would begin to share their issues or problems, and all of a sudden I would get an insight, particular words to say, guidance to give them, or even share them a message from a loved one. And they would ask me, like, how do you know this? And I'd say, well, haven't we talked about it? And they'd say, I haven't told that to anybody. So I began to really pay attention to what was happening with me. And before I knew it, their friends and their family were contacting me saying, well, you work with so-and-so and you gave them this information. Is it possible that I could talk with you? Well, I didn't know what to make of that. Around that same time, actually just prior to that, again, I worked full time. This is not something that I did professionally from the get-go. It is something that I actively rejected because it felt like a curse. I didn't want to know all of this about people. I didn't want to feel what I was feeling. It was, again, just too raw. It's like a filter that we all have, that is a buffer that creates this separation from us and other people, places, and things. Well, when we have a near-death experience, that filter, that buffer, that protective sheath is removed. So everything is exposed and raw. And so I could feel things of other people that I didn't want to, because I don't want to be feeling theirs when I was barely trying to cope with my own. And at first, I didn't understand that it was them. At first, I thought I was going crazy. Now, I interrupt here and say that I was very careful of who I shared this with, because in my own family, we have history of mental disorder, and my mother's brother, my dear uncle, is diagnosed schizophrenic. Schizophrenia is misunderstood. Schizophrenia is where that filter that I'm talking about is automatically removed, and they are immersed in a world and sensing and feeling other realms and dimensions that are actually real and here and accessible to all of us. But we have that filter. People who have schizophrenia, that filter is removed and they are able to sense and feel that entire other world of dimensions that is interlaced right here with us. So I was very careful to not talk about this so that I would not have a misdiagnosis. And so a lot of it I kept inside, and only the closest, probably my mother and my sister, were the ones that I would talk to and share with at the time, as well as my kids grew, my kids and my now ex-husband. So understanding this was a process. It is not something that I understood early on. I had to come to this realization myself of, wow, that's what's happening with me. So as I was working, you know, I'm not a shy person. I love working with people. I am not, you know, shy around public speaking and being in front of crowds. And so when I was working with others and in groups and I began to feel these physical sensations, I didn't understand. I knew it was something more. So I began to pay attention. And sometimes my ears would ring, my ears would burn on the edges, my heart would pound, my stomach would flip as I would be getting these impressions of the other person, like flashes, just these single flashes. And sometimes it would roll like a movie, almost like a memory, and not really fully understanding it was for the other person. I didn't understand that what I was experiencing was entirely their energy field that was being pressed upon me. Now, I interject here that let me just share with you the very first time that I understood exactly what this was. So little by little, I began to have courage and I began to understand that, okay, there's something happening outside of me. It's not inside of me. It's not my own memory. There's physical sensations that I'm having and it's coming from someplace. And so I began to just, again, pay attention. I happened to be at work in a small, it was like a team building event. And so we had a guest speaker and we were paired into these groups and it was kind of a large conference. And so there were people there that I had never met before. Well, at the table that I was at, we got paired into these small groups, pairs, 2 of us. And the entire crowd was pairing together for this particular activity. And I got paired with a gentleman that I had never met before. And that familiar feeling began to happen where my heart was pounding, my ears began to ring, I felt burning in my ears. And then I finally asked the gentleman, you know, is it okay if I tell you sometimes this thing happens to me and I can feel things, can I just share with you? And my heart was pounding at this time because I was really fearful. I thought, well, what if this guy thinks I'm crazy? And so, you know, he was really curious and he was gracious though. And he said, yeah, go ahead. So I told him that, you know, there's this bookshelf, and on this bookshelf, you walk by it every day and it's in a bedroom. And he said, well, is it in your bedroom? And I looked at him and he was awkward about it. And he was like, well, it's not my bedroom. It must be yours, I told him. And he looked at me very curious and he said, yeah. And I said, does that make sense to you? And he actually said yes. So I thought, okay, so let me just keep going. So I also described, I said, there's next to this thing on top of a shelf, there's this photo. And in this photo, it's a winter scene. There's a tree in the background and there's these big winter jackets and a funny hat and there's smiles. I said, and there's 2 gentlemen in the photo and I think one is you. Well, he looked at me absolutely shocked. His jaw dropped and eyes wide open and he said, yes. And I said, that makes sense. And he said, yes. He said, can you please tell me more? And so I just began to calm myself, close my eyes, and I just passed on a message to him. And I can't even fully remember what it was, but it was something that he had said like either that morning or the morning before, drinking coffee in the kitchen, something very specific that he would say. And so when I shared it to him, before I knew it, as I opened my eyes, he was crying. There were tears streaming down his cheeks. And what he told me thereafter is what set me on this course of understanding what it was. What he told me is that his partner had passed away 8 years prior, and that he had wanted to see somebody like me, but was never fully believing in it. But he always had a curiosity and wanted to make sure that his loved one was okay. So here I am, a complete stranger, sitting in a conference with this person, passing on this information out of the blue. And I wasn't even sure if he wanted it. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be made to look crazy or what kind of ridicule I was going to receive. And so it took a lot of courage for me to begin to speak out. After that experience, I sat in my vehicle. I cried for over an hour. And he told me, he said that he had always wanted to get that validation, but thought people like me were crazy, or they took advantage, or they were cold readers, which means that they pick up on cues and just pass on information. Well, I did not know what to make of what happened to me. It scared me, honestly, and it also made me feel like, who am I? But I also understood in that moment, like, wow, what a blessing for him to have received that gift. And that he had been waiting for so long for somebody to be able to pass that on to him. And here I was. From that moment, sitting in my car for over an hour, before I could even drive home, I had made a promise. And I understood that what I thought was a curse was a gift. Once I understood what it was and how to use it. And it's taken many, 21 years of continual attempts of courage to put myself out there. This being one of them. Since that time, so that's mediumship. Since that time, there's so much more that I could explain and describe that I've come to discover that is so much more than just mediumship. Because in there, I was also able to explain to him something that was happening in his life. Something that he had not shared with anybody. And spontaneously, I picked up on it and said something that made sense to him. Made no sense to me, but he knew exactly what the message was. And I knew that that was being passed on for something greater than myself. That I was there just to have the courage and the willingness to just speak what was being pressed upon me, because it was either his angels, his guides, and his loved ones that needed to give him a message. And I was just put in the right place at the right time with this ability. Forever changed his life. He had since contacted me for a couple of years after that, only to discover how it actually had an impact. Since then, again, having continual efforts of courage. So how is this even possible? How is it that I'm able to pick up on this? Well, that's been a process. To be honest with you, I have given up on trying to understand why and how. I know why, I know when, and I finally know how. I just let it go. Of me, myself, I can do nothing. But through the spirit that exists and is incarnate within me, everything is possible. With the spirit that is incarnate within you, everything is possible. And that's why I am here. That's why I am back. That's why I love what I do. So as I'm working with people, I pick up on a multitude of things. I'll begin to describe them and in multiple videos. But for now, the discovery of what I am and what I was capable afterwards, from being turned into a curse to a gift, and then having courage. And all I can say is with the guidance and the upbringing that I've had is that all things through that divine place, with balance and in harmony, harm to none, including myself. May I just be a clear vessel, keeping myself clear so that I could be attuned as an instrument to pick up on everything that is happening around me, within me, so I can relay it to the other person. So the way that this happens is that as I sit with someone, it is like an attunement. There's a merging of energies and a flow, and this does not happen just with the person in person. Oh my gosh, I have some of the most profound experiences from a distance. And in fact, I love distance sessions. It allows me to go even deeper in a way than the person being in front of me. Energy is energy, regardless of the space, the time, or the distance. There are probably, thousands and thousands of people named Tom Smith upon the planet. But when I am working with a particular person with their own unique vibration, their name does not matter. Their location does not matter. Their language does not matter. It is about attuning to the frequency, their energy, their uniqueness, sensing and feeling through, and then relaying everything that comes through. When I'm working with a person, oftentimes images. I'm a very visual person. I will get imagery in my mind, images, pictures, sometimes movie scenes, and oftentimes I can even feel the other person's surroundings. So if you're having a session with me, I might pick up on your location. So for example, I was working with a young lady recently, and I said, okay, in your hallway down the hall, there's 3 pictures. There's a shelf on there. You need to get the candle that is there. And I also need you to get your selenite crystal as well as your quartz crystal. Sounded strange, but she just reached over and she said, well, here's my selenite crystal and my quartz is down the hall. So she went to go get it, and sure enough, the candle that was on the little shelf was a battery operated one, but a candle nonetheless. It freaked her the heck out, and saying, well, how do you know this? Well, I am attuned to the individual, so I can feel and sense their environment. So that is a combination of remote viewing as well as clairvoyance. So when you have sessions with me, you will be my partner in the ultimate game of Pictionary and charades. It is a combination of impressions that I am being given and shown that all I am responsible for is passing on. And it's your message. You're the one that should know what they're trying to impart, and I'm just the one that's trying to say it. So it is my job to not make assumptions of what they are saying, and also to use discernment to understand, is it literal what they're showing me, or is it symbolic? Did it actually happen, or is it the feeling that they're trying to convey? And so all I can do is pass on what I'm being shown in my mind's eye, what I can see and feel and sense, and make sense to the other individual. So clairvoyance, also remote viewing, viewing from a distance. The other thing is getting sensations within my physical body, so clairsentience. So when I'm working with somebody, oftentimes I will feel the physical sensations of their loved ones or they themselves. So there have been times when all of a sudden I cannot breathe. There have been times where I will feel pains in my physical body that as soon as I say it, it's relieved. So I understand, but that did not happen early on. I would pick up on the physical sensations, and it would linger, and it would stay with me, and it would overwhelm me and even scare me until I understood that it was a way for them to convey information of what was happening with them. Sometimes I'll feel headaches. Sometimes I will feel very dizzy all of a sudden as I'm talking to people, and that is to show me what either their loved one is going through or what they themselves have gone through or are going through. So that's a combination of medical mediumship, where I can sense and feel things that are going on with people physically. I am not a doctor, I am not a counselor, but I will sense and feel things that happen with people, and I'll convey that, and I'll tell them, you need to check this out. And sure enough, I will get the information that comes back. It is like I can even scan an individual and pick up on particular parts of their body. I have so much stories that I can tell you, but I can feel it within myself. One of the most recent that was overwhelming for me was the sensation of feeling Alzheimer's. I was working with a client recently whose mother had crossed over, and as I was passing the information from her mother, all of a sudden, mid-sentence, I did not know who I was, where I was, what I was saying, and what I was doing. And then all of a sudden, I came back to myself a moment later. That was a first. So that is physical mediumship, feeling and sensing actual things within our own physical body. Clairsentience, feeling it within yourself. And then also medical mediumship is conveying the information to the other person. Oh my gosh. The other part of it is also just clear knowing. Sometimes I will say something that will just pop out of my mouth and I don't know where it's coming from. And that's called claircognizance, as a clear knowing of knowing something, not knowing how you know, but you know. That happens all the time. It is about being in flow, about sensing and feeling everything is around. So there's also clairaudience. Clairaudience is audio, where I'm also an audio person, where I can hear things. That's why my ears would ring, my ears would burn, but it's just another way for them to impress information. Sometimes a word will come into my mind's eye. Now, only on a couple of occasions have I heard it outside of myself, like a physical voice. Early on, as I was coping with my near-death experience, and again, one of the greatest challenges I had after that birth, it was imperative and critical that I got a second job. And I needed it to be very specific to work out. I'm raising 2 young children. I have a full-time job, and I'm now going to be seeking a second job. I needed it, but I needed it to work in a way that would work with my family. So I began to pray on it and say, okay, I need Saturdays and Sundays. I need early hours at a time that isn't going to interfere with my family time so that I can have the majority of my time with them. I need it to be and a position that is worth it, you know, that would pay enough. And I had been thinking about this for about a week. And I remember just driving in town. I lived in Santa Fe at the moment, and I was driving what is called Pacheco Street. And all of a sudden I heard in my head, it wasn't in my head. It was so loud, very distinct, a voice that was different than my own. And all I heard was Kinkos. Nothing more, nothing less, in the vehicle while driving at a stoplight. And I turned my head, and sure enough, there, this was, mind you, 21 years ago. So I turned, and it was called just Kinko's at the time, and I was passing it apparently. So the next morning I called, I talked to the supervisor, I put in my application, and she says, I don't know how you know, but I was just about to advertise this position that became available for a weekend shift supervisor for the morning shift. It would close out the evening and reset the computers for the next morning, as well as working in their office until about 2 o'clock. So it was administrative, which was in my field. It was the hours that I needed from 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 to 2 on Saturday and Sunday, shift supervisor, just by hearing a word out loud outside of myself. I didn't even think of that. It wasn't even an option in my head, but that's what I heard. I followed through, and I kept that job for 2 years. Saved my life. Wow. So that's clairaudience. Oftentimes you'll hear it within your head, and sometimes it'll sound like my own voice. And that was what was very challenging for me early on. I can now fully channel and have conversations with other angelic and benevolent beings that provide assistance. I work with my own guides now, and it does come up as a voice, but not, it sounds like myself, but I know that it is not me. There are so many times where I will be deep in meditation, having this communion, having these conversations with this guidance that is separate, outside, and available to us all. We have our angels, we have our guides, we even have our loved ones. And it took me a while to really understand all of that and how to work with it. because it's a separate thought. If I am being communicated to, it required that I paid attention and that I even understood what was happening. And so that is another way that it has actually shown up. So claircognizance, clear knowing, clairvoyance, clear seeing, remote viewing, being able to see actual real time the other space from a distance, clairsentience, feeling it within the physical body, clairaudience, hearing. So all of these different abilities, is part of what I had to come to understand. And that was not easy in the beginning. It has taken a lot of practice. It has taken an absolute deliberate intention and time and effort again and again and again. And it requires that I keep myself in the best place possible so that I can be clear, clear-minded, clear-hearted, and clear within my body so that I could pick up on all of this for somebody else. It is a requirement, not only for good living, to feel good, but it also is a requirement for the job that I do. Because if I myself am clouded with my own stuff, if I am dealing with worry and don't know how to handle it, who am I to even help another individual? This has taken me to a whole other level. Okay, now 21 years of coming to this point, doing the work, doing the hard stuff, changing my entire life, having the courage to face things, and having the courage to be myself and speak out. It's been a process. So this is just the beginning of many stories. I hope you stick around, and I thank you. So may you enjoy. Thank you for being here. Until next time.